This video analyzes the game played between Pirza P. Orca, who played with the white pieces, and Prox, who played with the black pieces. The code of the opening used was D05. This opening is called the Collet system with E6. Result: white won the game. What is the first move of the white player? White pawn moves to d4. One reason for the popularity of queen's pawn openings is that from the very first move they present problems for the defender. There is no method by which black can seize the initiative or even equalize in a hurry. Despite its inherently positional nature, the queen's pawn appeals tremendously to attacking players and has always been a favorite weapon of such aggressive spirits as Alekhine, Kears, Pillsbury, Bogoljubov, Spielman, and Collet. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to f6 brings a piece into play where it has an influence on the center. The knight move prevents white from continuing with 2.e4. A master moves his knight to f6 as instinctively as he breathes. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to f3. The knight develops toward the center, where he has the greatest freedom of action and the widest scope for his activities. The knight possesses the peculiar property of being able to attack any other piece, except another knight, without being under attack in return. This attribute makes it a fascinating piece to maneuver about the board. Combinations involving play with the knights often have a ballet-like quality to them. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to e6. Black can avoid the general attack of the Collet by playing 2 black d5, ready to reply to 3.e3 with 3. Black bishop moves to f5. Then 4. Bishop moves to d3. Bishop takes at d3, exchanges bishops, and black rids himself of white's most dangerous attacking piece, in this form of the opening. With his actual move, black releases his f8 bishop and does not commit himself to any specific line of defense. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to e3, indicating his design. Obviously white is preparing the typical Collet formation of bishop at d3 and knight at d2, to control the key e4 square, a jumping off point for the pieces in this attack. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to d5. Black plants a pawn firmly in the center, but this move, in combination with 2 black e6, does block in the c8 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3. White begins the concentration of pressure on e4, Essential in the collé. Generally speaking, it is a good plan to mobilize the pieces on the king side first, to enable early castling on that side. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to c5. This move is almost indispensable in queen's pawn openings. It is important not to play first, as black's c-pawn must not be obstructed. Black's move strikes at the center and establishes a state of tension in that area. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to c3, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been pawn moves to b3, white reinforces the d-pawn. In the event of 5 black pawn from file c takes at d4, white can recapture with the c-pawn and open the diagonal for the c1 bishop. It may seem that white's last move denies the b1 knight his best square, but in this form of attack the knight belongs at d2. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight from file b moves to d7. This is probably superior to placing the knight at c6. At d7, the knights are in touch with each other, so that if the f6 knight is exchanged the other can get to f6, an ideal square for attack or defense. At d7, the knight keeps clear of the file. The more open the tile is, the more useful will it be for the queen or rook that occupies it. Finally, should white play 6? Pawn from file d takes at c5, the knight can recapture and come strongly into the game. In queen's pawn openings, black's queen's knight often does a better job at d7 than at c6. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight from file b moves to d2, intensifying the pressure on e4. To the uninitiated, white's development has an awkward look. The pieces seem to be in each other's way, but as will be seen they can spring into action smoothly and easily. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to d6, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been pawn moves to b6, more energetic than 6 black bishop moves to e7, when the bishop is limited to defensive duties. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, castles on the king's side. White secures the safety of his king before starting any decisive action. It is dangerous to open up the position and leave the king in the center where it is exposed to a possible counterattack. White's castling is aggressive in character as the king's rook plays an important role in the coming attack. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, castles on the king's side. A black's castling is a defensive measure. But why give the king's permanent address when white has revealed that he is preparing an assault on the king's side? It would be better strategy to keep the opponent in the dark, delay castling for a while and continue developing the pieces, which surely can do no harm. Black might bring his queen to c7, with a view to an early black e5, and then follow to his c8 bishop, black b6, followed by black bishop moves to b7. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to e1, still more pressure on e4. The rook gets a grip on the e-file, it is closed now but will be opened after white plays e4 and pawns are exchanged. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to c7, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been bishop moves to e7, an ideal location for the queen. From c7 the queen bears down on the center, especially e5, and exerts great pressure on the c-file. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to e4, the key move in the collé. With this move white intends to blast the position wide open and release all the stored up energy of his pieces in a searing attack. The immediate threat is 10.e5, a simple, brutal attack on two pieces. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file c takes at d4 as compensation for being on the defensive. Black controls the open c file temporarily. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn from file c takes at d4, better than taking with the knight, which lets black place pieces on e5 and c5. White meanwhile renews the threat of winning a piece by 11.e5. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file d takes at e4, black parries the threat and saddles white with an isolated d-pawn. Such a pawn is especially vulnerable to attack as it cannot be protected by another pawn, the nearest one being a couple of files away. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight takes at e4, certainly not 11. Bishop takes at e4 because 11, black knight takes at e4 would be the response, and white loses the services of his valuable light-squared bishop. As Rousseau could not compose without his cat beside him, so I without my king's bishop cannot play chess, says Tarrasch. In its absence the game to me is lifeless and cold. The vitalizing factor is missing, and I can devise no plan of attack. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to b6 intending to mobilize his c8 bishop. Somewhat more to the point was 11 black bishop moves to f4 restraining one of white's menacing bishops. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to g5. The bishop joins the attack, and vacates the c1 square. The a1 rook will swing there, drive the queen off and assume complete control of a beautiful open file. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight takes at e4. Apparently black was afraid to play 12 black bishop moves to b7 as the continuation 13. Knight takes at f6, check. Knight takes at f6 14. Bishop takes at f6. Pawn from file g takes at f6 breaks up his kingside pawn position. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook takes at e4 superior to the natural 13. Bishop takes at e4, when black might reply 13. Black bishop moves to b7 forcing 14. Bishop moves to d3, to avoid exchanging bishops. Then he could continue 14. Black bishop takes at f3 15. Queen takes at f3. Bishop takes at h2, check. Consoling himself with a pawn for his troubles. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to b7. There is hardly anything better than this, which offers the bishop a long diagonal. If, for example, black plays 13, black knight moves to f6, then 14. Rook moves to h4 is hard to meet. Then the threat of winning a pawn by 15. Bishop takes at f6. Pawn from file g takes at f6 16. Bishop takes at h7, check. Could not be parried by 14. Black h6 as 15. Bishop takes at f6. Pawn from file g takes at f6 16. Rook takes at h6 still wins a pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to c1, a fine in-between move. The rook is developed effectively on the open file, while the queen is banished to the first rank. There she interferes with the a8 rook, preventing its development for a long time, forever, as it turns out. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to b8. There is nothing else as 14. Black bishop takes at e4 15. Rook takes at c7. Bishop takes at f3 16. Queen takes at f3. Bishop takes at c7 17. Queen moves to c6 wins a piece for white. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to h4 the point. White's threat of 16. Bishop takes at h7, check. Forces one of the pawns in front of the king to move forward. White gets an advantage, no matter which pawn advances, as every pawn move loosens the defending structure. Every undefended square, occasioned by such an advance, creates a weakness in the position. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to g6, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been pawn moves to f5, if black tries defending the h-pawn by 15. Black knight moves to f6, then 16. Bishop takes at f6. Pawn from file g takes at f6 17. Bishop takes at h7, check. Wins the pawn just the same. Or if black advances the h-pawn by 15. Black h6, then 16. Bishop takes at h6. Pawn from file g takes at h6 17. Rook takes at h6 is an obvious sacrificial combination which shatters the cordon of pawns and exposes the king to a mating attack. After the next move, white has accomplished what he set out to do, he has forced the advance of the g-pawn. But how does he exploit the resulting weakness? Is there an attack against the pawn? Apparently there isn't, as in order to strike at it with the h-pawn, he must move the rook out of the way, and then play h4 and h5, a process which takes time and achieves little. What other line is there? Sacrifice a piece for the g-pawn? Obviously this is useless, as white still does not break through. But the pawn did advance, and there is a weakness somewhere. We know this fact to be true, and in this fact there must be the clue to the winning combination. The pawn's advance weakened the squares h6 and f6, as they are no longer guarded by the pawn. This means that white must try to get control of these squares, either seize and occupy them with his pieces, or use them as a means of penetrating into the enemy camp. But wait. Doesn't black's knight still guard the f6 square? Indeed it does, and this knowledge provides us with the information we need. The knight is the guardian of the dark squares, and the knight must be destroyed. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to b5 attacks the knight, which strangely enough has no place to escape to. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to e8, this was a mistake, a better move would have been rook moves to d8, what other way is there to protect the knight? If 16 black bishop moves to c8, then 17. Bishop moves to c6 wins the exchange. If 16 black bishop takes at f3 17. Queen takes at f3 queen moves to c8, then 18. Queen moves to b7 wins a piece. After the actual move, the knight is pinned and a good target for further attack. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to e5. In chess you may hit a man when he's down. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to c8, this was a blunder, a better move would have been pawn moves to f6, no better is 17. Black bishop takes at e5 18. Pawn from file d takes at e5, uncovering the queen's attack on the knight, 18. Black bishop moves to c8, or 18. Black bishop moves to d5, 19. Rook moves to c7, when the miserable creature must perish. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook takes at c8, taking the props out from under the knight. The technique is simple: if you cannot increase the pressure on a piece, see if you can dispose of one of its defenders. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen takes at c8, certainly not 18. Black rook takes at c8, when 19. Bishop takes at d7 wins 2 pieces for a rook, and then corners the queen. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at d7, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been knight takes at d7, white has 2 pieces for the rook and the attack. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to c7, not 19. Black queen moves to b7 or 19. Black queen moves to b8, as 20. Bishop moves to c6 wins the exchange. The alternative was 19. Black queen moves to a6, but black hopes for some counterplay on the c-file. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to g4. The first step toward exploiting the weak dark squares brings with it a threat of mate by 21. Knight moves to f6, check. King moves to h8, 21. Black king moves to g7 is the same, 22. Rook takes at h7, checkmate. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to h5, this was a blunder, a better move would have been pawn moves to f5, the king needs lots of room. The freeing attempt by 20. Black f5 loses to 21. Bishop takes at e6, check. King moves to h8, 21 black king moves to g7, 22 bishop moves to h6, check. Wins the exchange, 22. Knight moves to f6 and resistance is hopeless. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to f6 check, the knight comes in on one of the critical dark squares to strike the first blow. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, king moves to g7, if 21 black king moves to h8, then 22. Rook takes at h5, check. Forces a quick mate. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight takes at h5 check, sacrificing the knight to sweep away the pawns shielding the enemy king. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file g takes at h5, black must take the knight, because white mates after 22 black king moves to g8, or 22 black king moves to h7, 23. Knight moves to f6, check. King moves to g7, 24. Rook moves to h7, checkmate. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen takes at h5, the queen's first move threatens two immediate mates on the h-file. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, rook moves to h8, the only move to stop mate temporarily. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to h6 check, appropriately enough. White administers the coup de grace on the second critical dark square. Mate follows in two moves.